Welcome to episode 70 of the How to Japanese podcast. I'm Daniel Morales from howtojapanese.com, and it's November 2025. We made it. Otsukaresama deshita. This month I have a bit of a random newsletter post based on a compound that was kind of ringing around inside my head while I was debating whether or not to use it. And for my recommendation, I have something I did recently, this long weekend in Osaka. I'll share that down at the bottom. It's a bit random, but I was kind of having trouble thinking of something specific, like a travel recommendation, and decided to go with it because I think it's pretty interesting. So stay tuned for that. For the newsletter, I wrote about a compound called tojitsu. That's a word. Back in August, for my wife's birthday, I wanted to go out to dinner, and by chance I read a review of a Mexican fine dining place in the Japan Times. From what I can tell, it's about as close as you can get to Pujol in Japan, or at least in Osaka. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Pujol, you must go watch Chef's Table on Netflix, a series of documentaries about chefs around the world. They're mostly modern fine dining restaurants, so they trend to that kind of food, small artistic plates that look and taste beautiful. The director, or at least I think the creator of the series, is David Gelb, who did Jiro Loves Sushi. I won't get into my thoughts about Jiro Loves Sushi because I haven't seen it for a while, but I did not really enjoy it when I liked it. I mean, it was when I watched it. It was obviously impressively edited and put together, but I'm not sure Jiro comes off as well as many people think he does in that show. But Chef's Table, one of the episodes in the first season, is about Enrique Olvera, who opened Pujol back in 2000 in Mexico City. He makes this never-ending mole, which is in a Solera-style mole where you just kind of keep adding ingredients to it and keep it cooking. So it's just constantly simmering away, I think. The main dish he serves in the restaurant is just a small circle of mole on a plate by itself, and you eat it with fresh tortillas. Speaking of fresh tortillas, if you'll allow me a brief side quest, which I guess I'm already on to a certain extent, they aren't that difficult to make even in Japan. I picked up a tortilla press off Mercari and some masa from Amazon and started making tortillas earlier this year, and I think I must feel about tortillas how the Japanese feel about freshly steamed white rice. There's something delicious about that smell of masa that is almost like intoxicating and very deeply delicious. So yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for when I went to Milpa here in Osaka, and that's the name of this restaurant, and that's basically what we got. It was really incredible. They have a nice tasting menu with maybe 8 to 10 small plates that will really fill you up. When I set up the reservation, I saw that they also had drink pairings, 4 courses. But it was kind of difficult to tell exactly what was being paired. It did mention that the drink menu was put together by their sommelier, which kind of suggested that it would be wine, but given that it was a Mexican restaurant, I was kind of hoping it might be something a little bit more interesting, like mezcal or tequila, or even maybe Mexican beer. So when I put in the initial reservation, I skipped the drink package. Also, it was quite a lot. If there were going to be a number of courses, it was probably going to be more than I wanted to drink on any given Saturday, even on the weekend, to be honest. But, a few days later, I was kind of regretting it and wondering, what if I showed up and it was exactly kind of what I was looking for, but I hadn't reserved it, so I couldn't get it. So I emailed to ask about if I could add it on the day we went to the restaurant, and the sentence I used, I felt like included this really useful word that I wanted to talk about. The sentence I used was, 当日追加してもよろしいでしょうか? 当日追加してもよろしいでしょうか? Which is, would it be all right if I added the drink package on the day of? The word is tojitsu, as I mentioned, and it's an extremely efficient little word. I think it's one where the Japanese dictionary definition can be enlightening. If you look on jisho.org, the definition is a day in question, appointed day, that very day, the day of issue, publication, or you could add almost anything there. Visit to the restaurant, visit to a theme park, things like that. And then we have the Weblio definition, which is sono hi. そのことがある日、またあった日。その日、そのことがある日、またあった日。And I think Weblio definition here is more helpful because it clearly specifies that the word can be a day in the future or the past. The ga aru or ga atta. Whereas in the English, that's not quite as clear. So let's start by looking at usages in the future. I think one of the easiest ways to grasp what tojitsu means is the word tojitsuken. This is a word that you see all over the place. There are 222 million hits on Google, so it's a very common word. It's a type of ticket to an event or venue that you purposefully don't reserve. It's one you buy on the day of your visit, which in this case is tojitsu, literally referring to the day of your visit, the day your visit will happen. I think most of the time, these tickets are kind of like what we call in English rush tickets, except they're not always discounted in the same way. And actually, I found an interesting Yahoo Chiebukuro article that I don't mention in the newsletter or the blog post. So this is exclusive podcast content. But the post asks why tojitsuken are more expensive. And one of their responses is interesting. It suggests that tojitsuken aren't expensive, but the pre-orders or reservations are discounted. So the venue is doing a calculation about how to make the most profit, and for an event that won't sell out, that strategy might be to sell as many tickets as possible beforehand at a slight discount rather than keeping the price high and then discounting them for rush tickets, selling those like on the day of or something for discounted prices. I'm not sure if there's any evidence for that specifically in Japan, but it does make sense to me. So that's a good look at how to use tojitsu in the future. The tojitsu is the day of your visit from a point in the past. And so you're looking whether you want to yoyaku, reserve, and buy a ticket in advance, or wait until that tojitsu gradually kind of eclipses and becomes one with honjitsu, right, today. And you buy the ticket on the day of your visit. You can also just use it in a regular sentence, like say you have an event that you're planning for or a day you're going somewhere, even just like a doctor's reservation, like if you have questions. You can really efficiently refer to that day of your visit and make it extremely clear in the context of the conversation by using tojitsu. So for a doctor's reservation, like for example, often there's things that they need you to do that day before you visit the office, whether it's, not eating or drinking or bringing some kind of documents or things like that. You could say, 当日何か準備すればよろしいでしょうか? 当日何か準備すればよろしいでしょうか? Is there anything I should do to prepare for my visit or something like that? And it's very clear to the person you're talking to that tojitsu in this context of this conversation of making a reservation, of having to go to this medical office to do some kind of procedure or something like that, what tojitsu means and everything kind of wrapped up in tojitsu, including whatever that procedure happens to be. As I mentioned, tojitsu can also refer to things in the past. I think you often see it paired with koto in some of these cases. One of the instances that I've been seeing a good bit are from blog posts writing about something that happened. And I found 5 quick examples from Ameblo, which is one of the big kind of free blogging websites in Japan. And those examples are Juken Tojitsu no koto, so the day of the entrance exam. Shussan Tojitsu no koto, the day of my delivery or birth. Tanjobi Tojitsu no koto, the day of my birthday. Hikkoshi Tojitsu no koto, the day that I moved. Or Inshi Tojitsu no koto, the day of the graduate school exam. In the first of these, I looked at the blog post and I linked this in the newsletter, and the writer uses tojitsu in a sentence as well. Here's that sentence. 天気や事故による公共交通機関の運転状況も気になるところですよね。実際、当日は雪の予報が出ていましたし。天気や事故による公共交通機関の運転状況も気になるところですよね。実際当日は雪の予報が出ていましたし。 And this would translate to something like the conditions of public transportation related to the weather or accidents are also a concern. In fact, on the day of the test, the forecast was snow. For the blog, I looked at a couple of examples that I tracked down in Aozora Bunko. Here's a sentence from writing from Sakaguchi Ango, titled Kobayashi-san to no tsukiai, my relationship with Kobayashi-san. 私は東野のことをすべてよく記憶しているが、それは当日私がお腹を壊して酒が飲めなくて、一度の主演をただ一人傍観したからである。I remember everything from the evening of the event very well, and that's due to the fact that my stomach was upset that day and I couldn't drink, so I spent the entirety of the party just observing people. That day here is tojitsu, that's what I translated to in English, but it carries a bit more implication than like something like sonohi would. It wraps up a little bit more, and I think in this sentence we actually also see toya in the same sentence, which means that night, the night in consideration, the night of the event. So it's pretty interesting, I think, how the ataru, the to, can be attached to many different words and immediately helps clarify relationships within like time and context. So I think now that you'll see it here in Tojitsu, you'll see it all over the place. Here's one more example from Akutagawa Ryunosuke in Noraman Ningyo. I'm not sure what Norama means, but here's the sentence. 当日、僕は車でその催しがある日暮里のある人の別荘へ行った。That day I went to the person's vacation home in Nippori where the event was being held. It's nice to also see that you can just set tojitsu there at the beginning of the sentence and immediately orient a reader. And I think it's important to note that you don't even need a particle here. Tojitsu wa would be very different from tojitsu. And I think we saw that in the example sentence from the blog that I read out, where the writer was talking about the train transportation conditions based on like accidents and the weather. That was the first sentence, and then the writer was writing generally there, and then the next sentence said jisai tojitsu wa, and the wa there I think does the work of specifying that it's the tojitsu for the writer rather than the kind of general conditions. So we go from this one sentence that does general conditions, で天気や事故による公共交通機関の運転状況も気になるところですよね. So that's general. 実際当日は and the wa there does that work of like distinguishing. Whereas if this writer, Akutagawa, is in his story, is just at the beginning of it, there's really no differentiation going on. So he just says tojitsu. So tojitsu is a super useful, super efficient little word. And I feel like getting used to it is a mini level up with your Japanese ability in terms of being able to use Japanese strategies to build context and reference within your language rather than trying to layer Japanese on top of grammatical structure that is fundamentally your own native language. That's, I think, a really important step with the language. And you can do that with Tojitsu. That's all I've got for the newsletter today. I do have 2 Iro links this month. The first is a sad one. I learned through friends that Aoki Tatsuo passed away this month. Aoki-san was the longtime proprietor of the craft beer bar Popeye in Ryogoku, Tokyo. He kind of passed on that title at some point. There's a second generation master, Kido-san, at Popeye now, and he's the one who does all their social media content. They're very active on Instagram, promoting craft beer. Popeye itself has been around since 1985. They weren't always a craft beer bar. I think they started off more as a standard Japanese izakaya and then switched over to Western style at some point, I think after the bubble burst. And I think that's what Aoki-san is saying in one of their most recent Instagram posts from October this year. That's the most recent one. I haven't seen any official news or posts about it, so I don't know if this is still a bit of a sensitive topic or something like that. But I've seen a couple social media posts in both English and Japanese that seem to confirm the news. I've been going to Popeye almost as long as I've been visiting Japan. I went there for my 22nd birthday, and to give you some context, I'm 44 this year, so that was half a lifetime ago. I spent New Year's Eve there in 2009, and I went on dozens of other occasions just more casually. Aoki-san was always extremely kind, as were all the other members on the staff, and super interested in promoting craft beer. So this is truly sad news for the beer community in Japan. Popeye really was a game changer. Aoki-san expanded their number of taps pretty quickly, up to 70 taps, and they held events like their Real Ale Festival to help promote beer. Aoki-san also opened a yeast laboratory and I think a brewing company to help supply beer to Popeye. This is something I learned in 2016 when I interviewed him and Kido-san, the current master, for an article I wrote for the Japan Times, which I've linked over at the newsletter, so give that a read. It's about 3,500 words, so the Japan Times really let me go on about that. And I think the article still holds up because of the research I put into it. If you're in Tokyo, drop by Ryogoku and have a pint for Aoki-san. Really sad to hear about his passing, and rest in pints, Aoki-san. The other link I shared in Iroiro is Philip Brazer's new Substack newsletter called Masako Story. Brazer is a Tokyo-based writer who's contributed to the Japan Times and other places. He writes very regularly on his website and a website called Cat Foreheads and Rabbit Hutches, both of which I've linked on the newsletter this month. On Cat Foreheads and Rabbit Hutches, he and his partner Masako write about housing trends in Japan, which is very interesting for those interested in the topic. And his new newsletter is the story of his partner Masako, and by way of her personal story, I guess, a look at the history of Japan. The first post really hooked me. It was really, really nicely done. So I'll be looking forward to the other posts in the series. And my recommendation this month may be hyper local to Osaka, but I was having trouble coming up with something, so I decided to go with something immediate. This past weekend, I went to Shitennoji Flea Market, which may be the most flea market rushy flea market I've ever been to in Japan. When I think of a flea market, I'm thinking of like real kind of like treasure hunting type situation, not like polished stores selling their products, like the Nakanoshima flea market I went to like a month or so ago. It was overcrowded and mostly just a bunch of boutiques selling stuff outdoors, although there were a few bookstores that were interesting. And when I think flea market, I'm thinking like dust-covered old cameras, retro magazines, and models, old kimono and clothes, like real ukiyo-e prints, not reprints, and then random other treasures that you really have to sift through to sort them out from just the junk that people are trying to get rid of. And that's what Shitennoji offers, and they offer a lot of it. It's Shitennoji is, as it sounds, a temple down in the southern part of Osaka near Tennoji, and it's an expansive temple on its own. And then every month on the 21st and the 22nd, it fills up with people selling all different sorts of stuff. When we went, we came from the Tanimachi subway line and kind of went in through a rear entrance. So we didn't get the full experience of walking in through the main gates and seeing the most crowded areas immediately. We kind of started at the back, like northern side of the temple that has like a few stragglers here and there, but it was still really nice. And when we finally, like, as we made our way into the temple, we just kept seeing more and more and more tables set up and more stuff, and it was great. It was really interesting. There were some food stalls and some nice restaurants and cafes on the streets nearby, including a great bakery really close to the station called Narutoya that I would definitely recommend if you're looking to pick up something to eat. Obviously, you'd have to time out your visit when the 21st and 22nd align with the weekend. If you are not living in Osaka, or if you don't have the day off or something like that, if you're gonna, I guess you could take the day off to go to a flea market, but if that's your kind of thing, that might be worth it. But I took a look at the calendar, and your next chances on the weekend will be in December. The 21st is a Sunday. Um, February 2026, both days are a Saturday and a Sunday. In March as well, March 2026, both days are on the weekend. June 2026, the 21st is a Sunday. August 2026, the 22nd is a Saturday. And then November 26th, 2026, both days are Saturday and Sunday. So you've got 9 chances over the next year, and I'd say it's worth it if you live locally. Um, I'm sure there are some great flea markets in elsewhere in Japan. Let me know about them. Are there any good ones in Tokyo? I imagine the ones in Tokyo might be mob scenes, if they are well known. The one here, it was very clear that it's on the tourist radar. There are a lot of tourists there, but there were a lot of locals too, and it wasn't overly crowded. Which the Nakanoshima flea market was a really kind of polished, well produced one. Nakanoshima itself is a small, narrow little island that's kind of right there in between the Kitahama Tenmabashi area and the Tenjinbashi area, Umeda area of town, and it's right in the middle of this river. So there's limited space. There were limited little boutiques, really polished. Plus, it's a natural draw with like museums and transportation hubs there, so it was really crowded. This, on the other hand, was really comfortable, even with even with all the tourists. I would say there was a lot of space. It never really felt crowded. One of the Hiroshima Yaki stalls had a long line, but that was, I think, because it was right near the main entrance of the flea market. If you went further in, there were places selling like yakisoba and things like that where there wasn't even a line. So I'd recommend that. Definitely worth checking out. And that's all I've got this month. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next month.